Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. I'm Morgan McClintock, the CEO of startup marketing agency Firebrand. We've launched this podcast to interview the best in the business, but I'm not going to do it alone. So please meet my co-hosts.
I'm Nicole Pytel, Firebrand's VP of Content Marketing.
And I'm Chris Ulbrich, Firebrand's Head of Media Relations.
I'm Ian Lipner, a tech PR and crisis communications veteran.
We'll drop a new episode each week, so there's plenty of fuel for your marketing fire. Get the spark you need to take your startup to a whole new level. Hello and welcome to Fired Up, the startup marketing podcast. My name is Morgan McClintock and I'm joined today by Nicole Pytel.
Hey there, Morgan. Hey, everyone. I'm really excited about today's episode because we all know that being a CMO is a giant job, and probably the biggest part of that giant job happens in the first 90 days. And that's exactly what we're going to talk to our guest about today.
Yes, we are joined by Chris Heggem, who is a VP of marketing at Tromso, and he has been in B2B cybersecurity for over 15 years, and he helps companies with unique products and services establish their identity and communicate more clearly with their customers, differentiate from the competition, gain market share, and drive revenue. And he's advised over 50 Silicon Valley startups in solving their marketing challenges, including Noname Security, Avi Networks, which was acquired by VMware, Yubico, Sofi, and PagerDuty. So, Chris, welcome to Fired Up.
So glad to be here, Morgan. Hey, Nicole.
Hey, Chris.
Great to see you. We're going to be talking about the first 90 days as a CMO, and I want to start with something fairly topical here. I have a Harvard Business School career coach, Matt Spielman, has said that research suggests that an employee's first 90 days will in large part determine his or her performance, longevity, and contribution to the company. So, first question, what do you think about that? Do you agree with that?
I absolutely do. I think the article is fairly spot on a lot of things. It sets the tone, but I'd say if you even take a step back, especially in an early stage company, when they're bringing on a marketing leader, it's generally because the company hasn't achieved certain success criteria. They don't have enough revenue. Sales is saying we're not getting enough leads. The market doesn't know about us. And what ends up happening is everyone else in the company starts coming up with a laundry list of tactical things that we should do. We're not number one on Google. We don't have a newsletter. We haven't written a blog post. Should we start a podcast? And what ends up happening for a lot of marketing people when they join a startup is they inherit this long laundry list, and the role stops being strategic and it starts being tactical. You work on executing everything that the founders want you to do. It isn't helping you with your awareness in the grand scheme of things or driving revenue. So then you go through round two of the laundry list of new ideas. And ultimately, you've now become a yes man or a yes woman and doing a whole bunch of things that ultimately aren't why you're in marketing in the first place. So I think the first 90 days really sets the tone. And if you are going to be a strategic leader and a data-driven or goal-based leader, you have to do that right off the bat. And you cannot go down the slippery slope of doing all the things that everybody needs as a marketer.
Just random acts of marketing that are tactical, pulled straight into the tactical, that don't have any strategy or ultimately any impact.
I wish I knew this early on, because there were so many times some of my worst experiences in a marketing leadership role were people listed off a whole bunch of things that I knew I could do. And I was so excited to say yes and make everybody happy. And at the end of the day, they weren't happy that I did those things. They were upset that they still weren't getting the results they expected. And I was kind of caught in the middle. Ultimately, they wanted more pipeline. Ultimately, they wanted, some of these KPIs that I would have probably addressed very, very differently. But again, they had all these things that I knew. I'm good at video. I know marketing operations like the back of my hand. I can do messaging. I can create content. Yes, 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 yes. And then I became a whipping boy, just like and an errand boy. I just had to do all the things. And every quarter or so, it just was a new brainstorm of ideas that I ended up saying yes to. And it just wasn't a good relationship. In the first 90 days sets that tone.
That's a great example of what not to do. Let's talk about that first 90 days as a CMO. You just joined the new security startup Tromso. What is the first priority for you? Day one, job one, what do you look at?
I think number one is let's think about the outcomes. What is it that we need to do? And anyone who works with me knows with me is there's one metric that I want marketing to be measured by at all times, and that's pipeline generation. So that's ultimately what the outcome is. There should be alignment across the board there because, again, if someone says, oh, we really want to do these tactical things or we want to improve an awareness, just, okay, great. If everyone's aware of you and you still have no pipeline, is that a good scenario? I think it's pretty easy to get alignment there. But then what you need to do is figure out how do we get there and why is the company falling short of these pipeline goals today? If you did not join the company, where are those pitfalls? And specifically, I see this in three distinct areas. One is messaging and positioning. Are we talking about the company in a way? Have we created an identity that the market can actually react to and engage with? It doesn't matter how much budget you have, how much you can spend on advertising, how many trade shows you can sponsor. If you don't have an identity that the market can respond to, we've got a problem. So it's your messaging, your positioning, in a lot of ways, the content that goes with that. Think of that as the fuel. The second thing is the operations and reporting side of things. This is the engine. How are you actually capturing and attributing lead sources, and how are you doing routing? Because again, if you have this amazing story to tell and you're not handing off effectively from marketing to the BDRs, from BDRs to the account executives, from the account executives to the solutions engineers, and accelerating to POCs. And again, if marketing's goal is to get pipeline, you need to make sure that you have the operations and reporting in place to identify where there are issues, that you're able to actually have this robust engine. And then the third aspect of this is how do you start accelerating go-to-market programs? So that's your campaigns and other things like that where you're actually going through and putting everything in motion. How are you putting the fuel in the machine and driving the car, right? That's generally what I look at. It has to start with this idea of pipeline and then these three core areas that need that focus right away.
Right. So those are the messaging and positioning, that's the fuel. The ops and reporting, that's the engine. And then it's the go-to-market campaigns, that's the direction. And the direction needs to be driving pipeline.
Yep.
So let's slice and dice this timeline up a little bit. So we're talking, let's break it up 30, 60, 90 days. Where is the time spent within those three things? Are you talking to sales? Are you digging into dashboards and seeing what exists and what doesn't? Are you looking at competitors? Are you doing product deep dives? Like, where are you at those 30, 60, 90 points?
Great question, but I'm going to cheat a little bit. Generally, when I'm joining a company, I'm trying to do as much of what you just were talking about before I even join. I want to be able to see the product. I want to be able to talk to a customer. I want to talk to sales before I even join a company. I think there's a lot of times you can join a company, look under the hood and go, whoa, this isn't exactly what I was expecting. And what you thought you were going to get accomplished in the first 30, 60, 90 is going to be the first 90, 180, 270, just because there were things that you were expecting to be there. So generally, I try to have a pretty good understanding of the competitive landscape, an understanding of how customers view them. I should know the product fairly well before I jump on board. Not all the time are you going to be able to have that opportunity, but that's generally what I try to do. In the first 30, this is where I really want to focus on getting that identity set up. There's several aspects to messaging and positioning, but it's really understanding a few things. One is, who are we selling to? And when I say broad here, I want this to be broad. That doesn't mean try to make the product or service meaningful for everybody. It's understanding that, especially in the B2B space where I tend to work, you are buying via consensus. There are a lot of people that can kill a deal. Everything from the champion who says, this is amazing for my company, to the practitioner who is, I would be the one using the product or service on a day-to-day basis, to procurement and legal who could just kill a deal just because, they don't like the paper that you're on, or all kinds of different things like that. So I think it's kind of understanding who are all the people that can really screw this up and understand what they care about. And they all care about different things. It's usually not mutually exclusive. You just need to be aware of what all that is. I think it's also very important that you understand that your company also has a persona. People need to go through and understand, why are they buying from you instead of somebody else? And it's about who you are. It's not about what you did or how you did it. Right? For instance, Steve Jobs wasn't really great at building music players before the iPod, but he was such an innovative guy that when he decided to build a music player, you thought, I'll give you a listen. And he did the same thing with the iPhone. People look at Elon Musk the same way. He's the CEO of like half a dozen companies. They all do radically different things, but because of who he is, whether you like him or not, if he comes up with a new idea, the market will react to it. So there's a lot of times people start saying you should buy from us because who we are is we're the first people that made a patent in this area. No one really cares. Like, did you feel their pain? Have you been a practitioner? And are you a peer in the market? Which is something that's very interesting about Tromso. Our founder and CEO has been a security leader for 20 years. So when he speaks to the market, he speaks as a peer, not as a college dropout who built a really awesome hammer looking for nails. He brings a lot of credibility to the table. Same way for a lot of companies in cyber, if they come from Unit 8200 from the IDF, you have Palo Alto Networks, you have Imperva, you have Wiz, you have Noname. All these companies that have that pedigree, there's an expectation by saying, look, who I am is important, and that's why I'm uniquely capable of addressing this. So understand who you are in the equation, understand who you're talking to is really important. And I think that the next part of the first 30, really trying to drive in on what are the value drivers? Why should the market listen to you? And it has nothing to do with what it is that you're building or how you're building it. It usually comes down to one of three things. You're going to be more efficient, you're going to save a lot of money, or you're going to be more secure. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a metric behind your why, you've got a problem.
Love that. So you're talking about a lot of really foundational stuff. And a lot of times folks want some really quick wins. They want you to come in and whether it's moving the needle just a little bit or getting everybody excited internally. So how do you balance all of this foundational work with a couple of quick wins that are maybe going to make everybody feel a little bit better?
I don't think there's such a thing as balance in the first 30, 60, 90. I think you're trying to do as much as you can. This is, I guess, where instinct comes in a bit more. I just was talking about this with my VP of sales, where sometimes I get really frustrated where I don't feel like I finished a project that day or that week. Like I started a bunch of things, but I don't get things across the finish line. I measure myself by what I've completed. That's also how a lot of people are going to measure me as well. So I think sometimes I'll be like, maybe I'm biting off more than I can chew on some of these bigger projects. What is a quick win that I can do? Okay, let me crank this out. Let me write this one pager or this copy for this, or let me get this thing kicked off with a vendor or whatever it is. I want to get something across the finish line so I feel like I can get those quick wins. But again, not a lot of balance. Usually I feel the imbalance and I start reacting to that.
You've got to be seen to be doing it and not just doing it. And if you go to do too much of the foundational stuff that's going to bear fruit in 6 months, the board meeting is going to come up before that. So you've got to have a few headlines before that. So it is a balance, but it sounds like when you're in the thick of it, finding any kind of balance is hard.
I think most of the time you'll also just see some pretty big gaps of, oh, here's this thing that I know is really effective for a company of this type and for an audience of this type. We just never done it. And it's not hard to do one of those things, whether it's doing a LinkedIn Live or a webinar or adding some new type of offer to your nurture campaigns. You can find those types of opportunities to find those quick wins. But I think the balance here, back to that concept of balance, is if you're doing so many ad hoc things and you're not ultimately building your scalable fuel, scalable engine, and starting to drive a car in a more scalable and sustainable way, using that analogy, you're going to be chasing your tail, finding more ad hoc quick wins, and you're going to get diminishing returns from that.
Let's talk a little bit about that fuel, the messaging and positioning. It's like the first thing that you need to do in that stack of three. And you can probably start it, have some assumptions at least before you go in, because you've looked at the product, you looked at the competitors, you've looked at what the company is currently saying. So you can kind of do some of that initial desk research. Now, you have a really good sort of process around that for sort of messaging and positioning. You've done it with the companies you've worked at and a number of the companies that you've been advising. So just talk us through that framework and your general approach to it, because I think messaging can be pretty daunting.
Yeah, it can. I think it's really tricky when you start with the product, right? And it's so easy to want to do that. The engineers or the CTO oftentimes will be like, here's this really difficult thing, or we're the only company that does this. And you want to start talking about that because it's so exciting. And it is a hard challenge. Not trying to dismiss that at all. But I think you are in a very different journey when you are working at a company versus the buyer's journey. The buyer doesn't even know who you are. So the first thing that I always try to do when I'm doing a messaging framework is I pretend that the company doesn't exist. I don't even pretend that there's a competitive landscape. It's just like, who are the buyers? What do they care about? What is this pain that they're experiencing? Because at the end of the day, your messaging and positioning needs to not only compete with the others in your specific category, but you're competing for mind share. In a lot of ways, you're competing for, how do I become a top 3 priority for my buyer? So in the context of their professional life, but in a lot of ways, you're also competing against Netflix and YouTube and everything else that's consuming the time of the people you're trying to sell to. How do you capture their attention? Because if you are the number 11 priority professionally or personally, you're not going to do very well. You have to find a way to work your way up and really understand what you're navigating towards there. So I think for us, it's really understanding the pain that they live in and how do we solve that as a company. But the first thing that we need to do is really define what that pain is. It's not a mixture of crazy, unique words like revolutionary or seismic or whatever. It's really just coming down to, in the cybersecurity space, this is true for most cyber vendors, that code and cloud assets are deployed faster than they can be secured. You're always going to be having this challenge. But then when you dive deeper into that, what does that look like? How do you talk about that in the language that your buyers would talk about in the water cooler? Where are they sinking the most time? Where are they sinking the most resources? And how can we start talking about pain in a metric? As an example, with Tromso, mean time to remediate is a metric that security people care about. Overall, mean time to remediate has been getting longer. And customers that buy our product are reducing their TTR. So for us, that's where we are able to tell the story around there's more things to remediate. The remediation is taking a lot longer. And why are we different than everybody else? Because if you measure us via MTTR, we're going to kick everyone else's ass. That's why. And I don't need to say a single thing about what we do or how we do it, only that my outcome via a metric is why it's critical to listen to us.
So your persona cares about MTTR because they're measured on it and it's an obvious metric that company can see. You talk about getting inside the mind of the buyer there. How do you do that? Do you listen to the gong calls with the sales team? Do you call the prospects up or the customers up yourself? How are you getting that language right in the messaging and the positioning?
This is probably the wrong place for me to be saying this, but people ask me what podcast that I listen to, and I say sales calls are my podcasts, right? I am listening to the gong calls or the fathom calls or the things like that. And I think if you are a marketer listening to this and you've listened to more marketing podcasts this week than sales calls, you need to go fix that right now. You need to be listening to those and make them one of the podcasts that you subscribe to. So I think that's a huge part of it. There are friendlies in terms of your existing customers that will be very, very brutally honest with you. And there are more and more interesting services in the marketing space that really help you validate your messaging and positioning. One service that I've used now a few times is called SageTap. Mm-hmm. It's weird insofar as you are doing an anonymous pitch to a person. Like you can go through and say, I want to speak to a CISO of a Fortune 500 company. And they'll say, okay, it's expensive. Here's $1,500 or whatever it is. And you pitch to them anonymously. Their cameras are off. You do not know who they are. They have a fake name.
Oh.
You go through the whole pitch. They ask questions and they actually give you feedback on it. They have to rate you on everything from your presentation styles to your value proposition to your demo to everything. And then if they actually liked it and you were addressing a pain, they opt in, which de-anonymizes them. So I think there's more and more services that, like, that's ultimately your goal. How do I get a higher rating? And you'll get very candid feedback there. I think it is a little odd sometimes, like not being able to see facial reactions and whatnot, but it's one of those things to use a little bit, especially as you're trying new messaging and positioning, and open up a new channel, open up a new source. Is it worth it to get it right? And it absolutely is. So things like that are use your network, use your customers, listen to your new prospecting calls, and then find other services to help accelerate that and get you some answers very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said sales calls are your podcast. So, it just is a testament to how much you like working with the sales team and how much time you put into it. I know sometimes even the BDR team will report to you. We know that marketing sales partnership is so important, but like, how do you make that work? Because there's a lot of organizations where that's a big struggle.
I think there's something that I said at the top of this podcast that is actually the key to that. It's having your goal as marketing be around pipeline generation. The main reason is marketing can't create pipeline. We never attribute a pipeline number to a deal, ever. Yet that's what I'm measured on. So for me to actually get that means I have to have a really good handoff to the BDR org. Because whatever I generate, it needs to be the path of least resistance for them to set a meeting. And that meeting needs to be so good that the account executive are going to open up that opportunity. And that, demo needs to go so well and needs to move to POC pretty quickly so that I can get a pipeline number put on it. Because that's ultimately what I have to retire for as my goal. So I think if you go through and you say, my goal is to generate 200 leads, this week or this month or whatever it is, the way that I act and behave is very different if you said your job is to retire 35% of the company's pipeline. I have to generate that myself. I'm influencing 100% of it, but I'm generating and responsible for being that first touch or that conversion touch that puts into pipeline stages. I have to be so much nicer to them. Not that I'm a mean person anyway, but like I'm thinking about, oh my God, the board's going to come after me. The executive leadership's going to come after me if the BDRs don't do what they need to do and AEs don't do what they need to do. So how can I help them? How can I be that 10x sales multiplier by being a really good marketing executive?
So when you talk about pipeline here, you're talking about opportunities that are quantified down at that sort of sales opportunity level. You're not talking about some kind of computed, hey, we have this many MQLs and on average that has a pipeline value of X. You're talking about actual deal pipeline down the funnel.
Yeah, and I have a specific number amount because, we actually look at, okay, what's our revenue goals? What's the multiple that we want to have in terms of coverage for that? And when do we need that to be? So I'm looking at, for me to hit next year's goal, I know to a dollar amount how much pipeline marketing has to generate by the end of the first half next year in order for me to hit my closed won numbers at the end of next year. And that's daunting sometimes when you look at that going, okay, great. What levers do I need to start pulling now? Because if you're starting to generate that pipeline in the second half, it's not going to close that year. So like what you're doing now is critical.
So you just mentioned the board there and, obviously pipeline is critical there, but how do you frame success for the board in that first 90 days? Like how do you help the board understand what's achievable, what investments are required, what's perhaps unrealistic? Talk to me about that.
Again, I think it comes back to having a conversation that's much more about success criteria than it is about tactical things. In the same way that we've kind of been breaking down this conversation is generally what I try to do with the board, where ultimately the company has a number. I raise my hand and say, I'm going to eat a percentage of that number, or I'll own it. Obviously, we work with sales and other teams to go through, and everyone takes their slice of the pie. And then we go through and say that, look, marketing is responsible for influencing the entire pie, but here's the slice that we're going to own. Here are the things that we are going to be doing strategically and tactically to build up into that and why we believe that we can do that. So everything from talking about our messaging and positioning, how we are validating that, how are we rolling that out? Like what assets does that, like how does that affect the website? What are you doing from lead generation type assets that are going to be leveraging this? How are you using it to help fuel the scripts and the collateral that sales are using on the phone and in email, et cetera, et cetera. So we kind of are mapping that all out and kind of prescribing what our expectations are there. I think when it comes down to budgeting and coming up with those plans, you're also looking at everything from field and events and trade shows that will help retire a bit of that. But I think you have to have a pretty strong plan as to, looking at the calendar, like as I mentioned earlier, that I have to do a whole lot in the first half. I work in cybersecurity. Traditionally, Black Hat has been a really good event. That's in August. Like anything I generate at Black Hat next year is probably not going to close in 2024. Maybe I get a couple accelerated deals, but most of those are going to be in 2025. So I think it's kind of looking at how are we building a plan that's building our known database, nurturing that known database, opening up new channels, bringing in more opportunities where we feel like it's realistic for us to hit our goals along these different benchmarks.
So you've talked a lot about how you work with the sales side. So let's talk for a minute about how you like to structure your marketing team. How do you fit in product marketing, demand gen, corporate marketing, all of those things, especially at startups where you may not get a person for each one of those things?
Pretty much every time I've joined a company, I have to wear all the hats for some period of time, which is exciting. It keeps things fresh. I think I'll readily admit that if I have a very narrower focus, it can sometimes get a little boring. But I will say that the lines between these different disciplines can get blurred at times. So it is helpful to have a product marketer who understands demand generation and operations, because they'll say, okay, we created this asset. How's that performing? Is that helping with the pipeline side of things? So for me, the way that I try to function, create all my orgs, historically is three main buckets: demand generation, which is field and operations and digital and all of those; product marketing, which is owns a lot of the content creation; and then comms, which is PR and AR. The goal for all three of them is around the pipeline side of things, right? Sometimes it's directly measurable, like demand generation. It's very, very easy to go through and do that. Other times it's less so, but I think we want to have everybody really, really hyper-focused on that. An example of this is, hey, look, if you're doing a really good job from the comms side of things, and you're doing a lot of analyst pitches, and you're helping people or get included in hype cycles or quadrant discussions and whatnot, that's helpful. If you can really push things on the PR side to help get case studies across the finish line, that can help accelerate campaigns that are focused on that particular customer's lookalike or that sector of the market that they're in, where oftentimes that can get spun out of comms really pushing things forward. Product marketing creates a lot of the content that DG will use. That's demand generation. So there is a lot of good synergies between all of them, but they're very, very different disciplines on the day-to-day. But yeah, generally I want to make sure that there is someone who owns each one of those core buckets. Right now I own them all. But then when we go through and we're looking for someone, my goal is always to, how do I hand this off to somebody else? If I hire a DG person, as an example, it's, okay, now I'm going to get more specialized and focus on product marketing and communications. And I want that DG leader not to ask me, what do you want me to do now? I want them to tell me, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Here are the campaigns I'm going to run. You're doing product marketing work. I need these types of content and collateral. Go create it for me. For me, it's, no matter what hires I do, I want them to own that function because I don't want to have to give it much thought. I want to check in every week or every other week, but I want them to truly own it.
Right. I think you need to give them authority and responsibility over that. And so sometimes as the leader, then you're leading it. You have a leadership role over the whole marketing function. But then also when you have that DG person, you're doing the product marketing side, you're fulfilling some of their requirements. So you're executing and taking sort of instruction. And that's a real balance. Now, we have worked together a few times, so I have a pretty good sense of what you're going to say here. But you've got a small team. How do you decide what to build in-house and what to outsource to an agency?
What do you think I'm going to say here? If you know me, so I'm just curious.
I think you're going to say, find someone who you can rely on, who can be part of your team and really wrap around and do all those things. But I don't want to lead the witness on that.
No. My answer here is always, how can I get results fastest? And I think there's certain things that are really difficult to do in-house, especially for one person. Like one of the reasons why I've used Firebrand so many times in the past is because you have an army of different people that can do a lot of different things. That SEO, as an example, you have multiple people from content creation to the technical side of it to those that are actually implementing things on the website. I'm not going to go find one person that can do all of those things. You can't even find one person that can do all of those things. It would be silly for me to go through and say, let's do this in-house, because that would ultimately be hiring 3 headcount to go through and achieve one thing where for a lot less cost, I can outsource that to an agency. I think there's certain things that I feel like we want to own in-house because we need that person to be close to either the product. Like product marketing is really hard to outsource that way. Doing field marketing is really hard to do outsource there because you generally have someone showing up who knows where they came from. They set up a booth, they scan a bunch of things, they throw it over the fence back. Like I want someone out there who cares about the product, that is eavesdropping on all the conversations, understanding the pulse of that trade show or that event, is really earnest around following up with all these people. And again, I have them all under the same, goals that I do, under getting pipeline generated. I want that person to be a pipeline hawk saying, great, we got 500 leads from this event. I only want to make sure that the best ones get followed up with immediately following the event. Here's an extra campaign or some other incentives that we can throw into that. How do we make that super effective? Like that is so hard to do from an outsourced role. So I think for me, it's again, how do I get value very, very quickly? And for me, I just care that it gets done more than how it gets done. I think SEO, PR, and other things like that, you can get it done much faster with specialized agencies. And for certain things like product marketing and field operations, you're going to get it done by having a person who owns it.
So sticking with the theme of getting it done, let's just get the AI question out of the way now. So how are you using AI with your team? Where is it having impact? What isn't it quite so good at yet? What's it doing for you?
Outside of language models, I don't think AI is great. What I mean by that is the purpose of AI is to automate things that are very time consuming. So if you said, go write this blog post around this technical topic, it would take me multiple hours on the research and the writing side. ChatGPT that everyone ran to, that people started going to that because, oh my goodness, I just say, I give it a prompt and boom, here's something that's 90% to 100% ready for prime time, right? So that's why AI is great there. You look at it in almost any other context, what time-consuming thing is it taking off my plate, right? There's so much context to my business that AI does not know. They understand the context of language, so that's helpful. So outside of things like ChatGPT or like right now, I only work with English-based buyers right now. but there's another AI-based company that does localization, so they can do language translation. Again, back to language models. That's Lilt. Lilt's really cool.
Yes.
So if I was trying to do customer support or sales or other things like that in other regions, I could go through and do that because, again, it's taking something that was very manual that you are either doing in-house or spending on an expensive agency that you can go through and automate. But I don't have anything that I can plug in and say, hey, set up HubSpot and Salesforce, do all the routing that I want, enrich all my data, do all the lead assignment. Like, there's nothing doing those things. So for me, I'm waiting for AI to kind of understand the context of me a bit more. So they understand the context of my language, a bit better. So for me, I'm not really using it too much. I'm wary about spending time and money on services that have AI just as a tagline on it that ultimately aren't going to give me an outcome that I want.
Lilt is a great tool. So outside of AI, what other trends have you got your eye on for in marketing at the moment? What's going to work next year?
I honestly think people are getting really tired of traditional buying and selling. We've been saying this for a long time, but it's been getting worse year after year after year. The amount of spam emails that you get, the amount of just phone calls. My phone, I literally get over 20 rings a day. I get 10 LinkedIn messages, people trying to say, are you hiring, trying to do that. I think people are already they're changing the way that they buy because of this. Like, I gave the example of Sage Tap beforehand. A lot of the sages that I've been able to speak to even afterwards, they like it because they get to take conversations on their own terms and they get compensated for doing it. I think we're going to see a rise in partners and channels. There's a lot of referral services out there where they go through and they have these chapters of security buyers or technology buyers or whatever else, and they're almost brokering the relationship, much like eHarmony.
Yeah.
Because the traditional way of brute forcing it is getting harder and harder. I'm not going to say you give up on those things, but I think we're hitting this fatigue right now. I'll blame social media for all this stuff. We try to boil everything down to a sentence or two, to a tweet, or what is it called now? An X. We boil it down to the littlest thing, and then you have to react to it, and there's no room for nuance. Buyers, by default, are saying no. Just across the board, select all, delete. Select all, delete. They're not even really looking at it too terribly much. So I think it's cutting through that noise as you really have to know them better than everybody else. But they're going to prefer to buy through protected channels or trusted channels more than going direct and just accepting cold calls and other things like that. I think that's where I think we're going to see a big change in how B2B happens over the next couple of years.
So you've shared so much advice. It's really, really great stuff. So for marketing leaders that are about to join new firms, what's the number one piece of advice that you would give them? Aside from focusing on pipeline.
Set the tone right off the bat that you care more about success than you care about. You want to make sure that that's where you have alignment with all the other leaders. We care more about hitting our number than we do about how we hit our number. Because there are a lot of people, when you put them to it, they're like, yeah, but if we don't build this other microsite where we share research on a weekly basis, get to the bottom of that quickly. Mm-hmm. There are founders that care very much about their pet projects, even if that means sacrificing on the goals and the number. And I don't think they've ever thought about it in that way. So you are joining a company. Make sure that you are set the tone strategic leader and that it's focused around hitting success metrics.
Good advice. We're starting to ask our guests about their predictions for 2024, tech predictions, marketing predictions. Care to throw your hat in the ring?
I think there's going to be a ton more around AI. Yeah. I think we're going to see probably a bit of investment around there, but I think we're also going to see just a lot of those go nowhere. I think we're going to see a lot of hype about it. And I think the number one thing that marketers should look at with all these new investments and new tools and new fun things is look at your cost per lead and your customer acquisition costs. AI is effective once those go down. I think we're going to see a big spike in cost per lead and customer acquisition costs because AI is not there yet. You're going to spend a lot more, and you're going to spend a lot more. Spend a lot more is what you're going to end up doing next year.
Right, but that's good advice. Like, it's useful only in so much as it's measured through a reduction in cost per lead, and that's how you should measure its performance.
You got to bring it back to metrics, right?
Yeah.
You have to say, okay, great. Not that I'm doing it. Doesn't matter about how many leads or impressions or any of that. That's all nice, but those are leading indicators. What's the cost per lead and what's the customer acquisition cost? Watch those numbers. They're going to go way up next year.
Good prediction. Our next section is called Smart People, Dumb Questions, where I literally have a bag of dumb questions on my desk, and I just pull one of them out at random to ask you. So, ready?
Oh, boy.
Here's the first one. Have you ever been mistaken for a celebrity?
Oh, God. Unfortunately, yes. But not in the way where someone's like walking down the street. I've had a couple images of me go viral on the internet, on Reddit with my kids, and people love to make some pretty scathing comments about me. So I've been referred to as a homeless-looking Michael Bublé, a fat Edward Snowden. Those were two of the favorites. And then actually, Morgan, you may remember this. There was several years ago, there was a chief of staff for now the governor of Montana. Her name is Christine Heggem. I'm assuming we're related somehow, but we don't know. But yeah, they started emailing my personal Gmail the entire political schedule of when they're going to these events, when they're going to be on. This went on for like 90 days. Emails like, you need to go to the airport and pick so-and-so up, and I just didn't say anything.
And it kept on going.
Didn't say anything.
I did not go to Montana. I did not pick them up. So yeah, that happened.
Someone still standing there at the airport wondering, damn, that Christine Heggem never actually came. What's the most unexpected turn your life has taken?
I don't know. I love being a dad. I knew that I was going to love being a dad, but I don't think I knew how much I was going to like being a dad. So that was definitely my number one defining characteristic, where especially when things are crazy at work and you just need to clear your head, I just want to go hang out with my kids. So
definitely life-changing. That's going to qualify right there. What's your favorite video game?
I am a gamer, so there's quite a bit that
this is a difficult
like.
decision.
A lot of my brothers and cousins work either in gaming or around gaming. So Counter-Strike 2 just came out. We've been doing that just for the old school side of things. Some of the new Mario games came out recently that I play with my kids. I like League of Legends. It's fun to play and watch as well after so many years. But I think for me it's more about getting a good group to play with than it is about any particular game. If I can get 5, 6, 7 people together to play a game together, I don't care what the game is. It's fun.
What's the strangest job you've ever done?
In college, I was part of a group that sent autonomous balloons from Knoxville, Tennessee to Ireland.
Okay.
We had like 8 or 9 world records for autonomous balloon flight. But the main guy who was running it became the lead scientist for Google Loon. Yeah.
Oh, really? The internet provision from a balloon that's suspended. This is a big balloon. This is not like a party balloon I'm blowing up and sort of strapping it.
No. So, I mean, it's about a 7 to 10 pound payload, but we were fabbing everything from the material of the balloon itself to building a device that had sensors in it. So if it got too cold, it would drop a liquor ballast. We'd have alcohol in there because it wouldn't freeze. So like we designed all kinds of crazy hardware on it, and we were triangulating where it was using ham radios, and it was a crazy project that we did for about 6 months. And yeah, it's just out there. It's unlike almost anything else I've done. So I dropped out of college to play poker professionally for a while. So I have a weird scattered past.
I wasn't expecting that one. Like mine's like working in a plastics factory at the night shift, and yours is, I was making an autonomous balloon that broke a world record. I think you win on that. Our next section is called FiredUp 5. So Nicole, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are 5 quick questions. So first one, what do you wish you had known before you got into marketing?
Marketing is the business of human reaction. So getting noticed, making people laugh, getting people upset, pushing buttons, making them think. That's what we do. I think when I first got into it, I was thinking more of the tactical side of things. Writing emails, hosting a webinar, updating the website. I wasn't thinking about why I was doing it. So if you're the type of person that loves to make people laugh, or you like to argue and get under people's skin, or whatever, use that to your advantage. That's why you're doing that. How do you bring that to the email? How do you bring that to the website? How do you know why you're doing what you're doing? Not that you just do it. Took me a while to figure out, wait a second, I should just be more myself. This works.
Well, that fits nicely into question number 2. What is the best career advice you've ever been given?
Yeah, be your authentic self. I am definitely a high energy person. There's a little bit of an edge to me. And I think for a long time, I was trying to conform to the industries that I was in. And one of my mentors kind of early on was just like, look, you don't need to write a traditional white paper. People don't want to actually read that thing. How would you go about solving the challenge of lead generation? How would you go about the challenge of doing this and do it in unorthodox, creative, thoughtful ways? So yeah, be your authentic self. If that's who you are, do it.
Awesome. So question number 3, and you cannot answer ChatGPT to this one, okay? So what is the tool or gadget that you have recently started using?
I wouldn't say recently started using, but I'd just be like, marketing needs to live in Salesforce or whatever your CRM is. And inside and out. Don't just look at lead records or contact records, but understand the business soup to nuts. How many leads are being generated this week? How many of those are converting to first meetings? How many first meetings are moving to second meetings? How many of those demos are turning into POCs? What amount of pipeline is set to close this month? These are questions that most of the time people, if you ask them in a meeting, would say, it's a great question. I can go dig it up. You should know that off the top of your head. Close ChatGPT, live in Salesforce, know this stuff.
Awesome. So what is the best thing you've learned over the last year?
Self-care is huge. Take time for your mental health and your physical health. You will be better at work because of it. And make sure that you are looking out for your colleagues and your employees too. I think there was a stretch early on in my career where I didn't take a single day off, never took a vacation. Whenever I left the company, I always got excited because I get all the vacation hours and a big check at the end. Man, I was burning out so often back then. So I think it's know your limit, come back and be able to give the best version of yourself, because if you start whittling down, it's toxic and it's contagious. You'll make everyone else sick and all that as well, and worn out too. So yeah, tell people, go take some time off. Find ways to surprise your employees and your team with time off so that they are taking care of their mental and physical health, and do the same for yourself. Always be 100%.
Absolutely. All right. Number 5, what marketing tactic are most brands overlooking?
Reporting on failures. I think marketers always try to go through and talk about how did they win this week or this month or this quarter, but you actually learn more from failing than you do from succeeding. So I think if you go through and say, hey, look, we tried this out. We did this thing and it totally bombed. We're never doing that again. Or we analyzed how much we've been spending on this advertising channel. And oh my goodness, we have a negative ROI on it. We're cutting that spend there, or we're going to now do a campaign where we're going to right size this. We're going to do a bunch of A/B testing, then we're going to shut it off. That shows responsible leadership in my mind. And I don't think that you should own your business, know your business. But when you have a big failure, don't hide on it. Don't let others ask the question. Volunteer, bring it out and say, here's what we learned. And we're not going to make the same mistakes twice.
All goes back to that whole being human thing.
Right. Well, I think that's very healthy. You're going to need to take a lot of risks in marketing, and so being open about things that don't go right and being okay with that is healthy. So Chris Heggem, VP of Marketing at cybersecurity company Tromso, thanks for being on Fired Up. If people want to reach out to you, how can they get in contact?
I think the best way will probably be on LinkedIn. Just when you try to do a connection with me, mention the podcast, and I will definitely look at it. Sorry to all the BDRs and salespeople that are going, hey, congrats on the new role. I'd like to extend my network. I don't usually open those. So if I see Fired Up in the comment, I'll definitely take a look, and we can start chatting on there.
Wonderful. Well, Chris, thanks for your time today. We look forward to talking to you soon.
All right. Thank you much.
Well, that about wraps it up for today. But before we close, we did want to offer all of our Fired Up friends a chance to grab a mega pack of all of our ebooks and guides. That's our guide to content marketing. That's our startup guide to paid media using Google Ads. It's our guide to attribution. You can get all of those, over 100 pages of goodness, at firebrand.marketing/firedup freebies. That's freebies with an S. And we hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, or drop us a note at firebrand.marketing. And as ever, the details of how to get in touch with our guest today can be found in the show notes. Thank you for listening. And until next week, get out there and crush your marketing goals.